Top 10 Most Insane Singapore Grand Prix Moments. The Singapore Grand Prix is one of the most distinctive races on the Formula One calendar. From the usual track layout to the most physically demanding racing on the calendar, it's no surprise that the venue has seen its fair share of insane moments. In this video, we'll go down memory lane and look at some of the most legendary battles, crashes, and controversies in Singapore Grand Prix history. So, buckle up. 2008 Crashgate. 14 years later, Nelson Piquet Jr.'s words immediately following his retirement in Singapore remain as chilling as they were when they first emerged during the Crashgate investigation. "Sorry guys," he apologized over the radio. "I had a little outing." That outing was part of a carefully crafted plot by rogue Renault team members. Piquet purposefully crashed, endangered the lives of spectators, marshals, and fellow drivers in order to activate the safety car, allowing teammate Alonso to win the race. Renault's dirty trick directly led to another equally iconic Singapore moment, when Massa, who had controlled the race until that point, left the Ferrari pit box with the fuel hose still attached. But more on that later. According to former Times chief sports writer Simon Barnes, as a single deliberate act of breaking the laws of sport, this probably counts as the worst case of cheating in sporting history. Flavio Briatore and Pat Symonds, who orchestrated the ruse, left Renault in September 2009 after the allegations were made public, and it became clear that they were very true. Symonds admitted his role in the scheme and received a 5-year ban for his part, while Briatore was barred from ever working for an F1 team again. The team's title sponsor, ING, also left. 2017 Ferrari-Red Bull sandwich. With Singapore, a race Vettel couldn't afford to lose for his 2017 title hopes, the event's only wet start added an unwelcome complication. Max Verstappen, whose wet weather prowess was already well established, had a better start. Seb swept aggressively across the track to squeeze him, unaware that teammate Kimi Raikkonen to Max's left had made the best getaway of all. Verstappen, sandwiched between the Ferraris, couldn't help but turn Raikkonen into Vettel before Max and Kimi collided again at the first corner, taking Alonso out with them. Any hope that Vettel had survived the incident was quickly dashed when the camera cut to his car, which had a gaping hole in its side pod and was rolling backwards after spinning on its own leaking fluids. Vettel and Verstappen were both quick to point the finger at one another. Meanwhile, the film was merely phlegmatic about the entire episode. In true Kimi Raikkonen fashion, "I don't think I could have done anything to change the end result apart from doing a bad start and not being there, and that's not really my fault." 2016 Lizard Invasion. A massive lizard made its F1 debut during practice 3 at the 2016 Singapore GP, causing an online frenzy. Max Verstappen couldn't believe what he was seeing as a massive reptile thought to be a monitor lizard scuttled onto the road in front of his Red Bull racing vehicle. The Belgian Dutch driver could be heard telling his team, "There's a giant lizard on the track." He later laughed as he passed turn 3 before announcing that he wasn't joking. The strange intrusion was also seen from the Sky Sports commentary box, where the presenters could be heard expressing their surprise at what they had seen. Even a Red Bull engineer who was nervously watching Verstappen drive around the creature exclaimed in a now famous radio call that the driver had come face-to-face with Godzilla. The creature's amusing appearance during F1 coverage in Singapore was also well received on social media, with F1 fans reacting in droves. The teams also chimed in, with Red Bull sending out a particularly amusing tweet. "Spy. People always say Formula One is full of reptiles, and now we have proof." 2013 Vettel's greatest win. Most of Vettel's 9 consecutive wins have been merged into one, as he finished his final title-winning season with a flourish in 2013. But his most dominant performance has stood the test of time. The combination of the Renault's engine's exhaust-blowing excellence and Vettel's counterintuitive technique reached a state of total synergy in Singapore. Vettel's inherent confidence in the RB9 was evident in his decision to sit out the final minutes of qualifying, despite being 6/10 clear on his only Q3 lap, creating the unique image of him watching anxiously from the garage as others attempted and failed to beat his time. His victory the next day by 32.6 seconds was so crushing that a former F1 team owner watching from trackside convinced himself that Red Bull was using traction control. And it wasn't just paddock personalities that had issues. With multitudes of fans, mostly Ferrari's tifosi, go figure, booed Sebastian Vettel on the podium. And the German had the perfect response. Obviously, they are quite emotional when they are not winning. And if somebody else is winning, they don't really like it. As long as they keep booing, we are doing a very good job. So that's the way I see it. 2010, F1 driver gets a part-time job. Not every driver would have the foresight that Heikki Kovalainen displayed in the final laps of the 2010 race. With flames spitting from the back of his Lotus, he decided at the last second not to take it into the pit lane and instead park it on the main straight. After all, it wasn't anything he couldn't handle on his own, and he handled it brilliantly, calmly taking an extinguisher from a Williams mechanic and extinguishing the fire. The crowd was already on their feet celebrating Fernando Alonso's victory for Ferrari, but Kovalainen's situation quickly drew their attention. In the eyes of F1 fans, Kovalainen had always been a likable driver, but that moment was perhaps the most representative of his spirit, and his humble responses let his actions speak for themselves. 2008. Massa pit stop disaster. Remember when we told you we'd get back to this? Well, here we go. Coming in from P1 during the Crashgate-induced safety car, the Brazilian stop appeared to be going to plan until he inexplicitly pinned the throttle and drove away with the fuel nozzle still attached, spraying fuel all over the pit lane and scattering Ferrari mechanics everywhere. However, it soon became clear that an issue with the Scuderia's pit release system was to blame, with the team using a set of lights to indicate when the driver could leave his pit box. Indeed, onboard video of the incident showed that Massa was given the green light, and being a racing driver, he didn't need a second invitation to pull away, clearly unaware that the signal had gone too early and that fuel was still being delivered into his car. It gave the unfathomable scene of his Ferrari driving down the pit lane with the nozzle still attached, while his mechanics had to race after him in the hope that he'd notice and pull over. Thankfully, the Brazilian noticed and stopped safely before heading back out on track, giving his team time to remove the nozzle and let him back out on the circuit, though by this time it plummeted down the order from the lead of the Grand Prix. Forget Interlagos, it is that moment that Massa rues as the day the 2008 championship was truly lost. 2013, Alonso gives Webber a lift. Sometimes, quite frequently, F1 does not help itself. Mark Webber was once again in the shadows as the 2013 race concluded, having stopped on the final lap while his teammates shone on the Singapore streets. Along came his old pal Fernando Alonso, who offered him a free ride back to the pit lane, returning the favor from the Nürburgring 2 years prior and creating one of the great F1 images. The stewards, including Derek Warwick, who had accepted a taxi ride from Gerhard Berger in Hungary in 1988, did not agree, reprimanding both drivers and imposing a 10-place grid penalty on Webber in the following race. Tone deaf would be the polite assessment of that decision. 2019, Vettel's last triumph. 392 days. That was how long Sebastian Vettel had gone without a win when he woke up on Sunday morning in Singapore on that day. But victory number 53 of the German's career was undeniably sweet, as Ferrari's Singapore Grand Prix strategy played perfectly into his hands, allowing him to take his first win in over a year, and a win he was quick to dedicate to his fans after a difficult few weeks. Vettel arrived in Singapore on the back foot, having lost to teammate Charles Leclerc in Belgium, before sabotaging his own race with a spin in Italy, finishing 13th as Leclerc won his second consecutive race. However, an early pit stop from P3 in the Singapore Grand Prix, the position he'd started from after Leclerc had secured his third consecutive pole position on Saturday, allowed Vettel to undercut his teammate and Lewis Hamilton in front, leaving the German with a net lead that he held onto, much to the chagrin of an irritated Leclerc. Vettel demonstrated that he could still teach the younger man a thing or two by slicing through traffic more decisively than Leclerc, with a series of safety cars assisting in maintaining his lead. With the lights glinting off his helmet, Vettel raised the Ferrari steering wheel and his finger to the sky and parked firm to celebrate his first victory in more than a year. Sadly, what nobody could have predicted at the time was that it would be Seb's final triumph. 2018, Hamilton's perfect lap. With over a century of poles to choose from, it's difficult to pinpoint Lewis Hamilton's absolute best. But any discussion of his greatest single lap must include this effort from 4 years ago. For context, during the Mercedes being a strong car and Hamilton being in the midst of what would end up being 4 world titles in a row, he and the W09 did not appear to be on track to deliver pole in Singapore, with the Brit struggling relative to his normal performances in Q1 and Q2. However, when it mattered most in Q3, he produced a lap that was 1.3 seconds faster than anything else he'd done during the session to take pole, in what he described as one of the most complete laps he'd ever done. Toto Wolff, on the other hand, called it the best lap he'd ever seen in a Formula One car, with Lewis putting together a sublime effort just inches away from the Singapore barriers. Only the onboard video can do it justice. But the pure driving ability displayed during that lap was breathtaking. 2012, Massa on the edge. Felipe Massa understands the fine line between glory and disaster better than most. Just rewatched the 2008 season for proof. But he was a shell of his former self by 2012, nearly 4 years after the title was cruelly stripped from him. Nevertheless, his gift for towing the line remained. Lining up a move on Bruno Senna as the cars entered the narrow Anderson Bridge, Massa was squeezed between the barrier and Senna's Williams before his Ferrari swung wildly right then left. He managed to steady the car just in time to take both the corner and somehow the position in a stunning display of car control. That's all there is to our list, folks. Take your time to catch a breather, but don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us out. If you believe we have left anything out, please leave it in the comment section below. Have a wonderful morning, day, or evening.